Demand is a representation of how consumers respond to price changes. It tells us how much of something consumers will buy at different possible prices. Now we will dig into the factors that determine demand and see how demand changes when those factors change. First, we're going to look at income. In the demand curve we derived before, income was a factor present in the demand equation. Our graph relates the price and quantity for X1, which means that everywhere on this demand curve, we are holding the consumer's income constant. This would be their demand at a specific income, and if income changed, so would their demand. When we change the price of a good, we saw how changes in the consumer's optimal consumption bundle form the demand curve. Price increases lower the quantity purchased, and price decreases raise the quantity purchased. If we graph the outcome for every possible price, we will have drawn this demand curve. These are the changes to each graph that happen as a result of a price change. In the graph on the right, the graph for demand, notice that demand does not shift at all when we change the price. Price changes just move our position on the demand curve. So we know what happens when we change the price, but what happens when we change Y, our income? When our income increases, it shifts our budget constraint out, parallel to where it was before because no prices have changed, only our income. With higher income, we can shift our indifference curve out to a higher level of utility, allowing us to buy more of each good. But importantly, we're buying more X1 even though the price of X1 did not change. We need to reflect this change in our demand graph as well. The price of X1 did not change, so that has to stay the same, but we are buying more X1 than we were before. So our consumption decision has pushed out to here, which means we aren't on the old demand curve anymore. We're on a new demand curve, one which is shifted out due to the increase in income. This is actually something generally true when it comes to graphing functions. Both x1 and px1, the quantity and the price, are represented on the graph. Quantity, x1, is on the horizontal axis, and price, px1, is on the vertical axis. So any changes to those variables will be reflected as a change in our position on the graph only. We do not need to shift the curve representing the whole function. But if we change any variable not represented on the axes of the graph, we do need to shift our curve. An increase in income shifts the entire demand curve to the right to reflect the fact that the consumer will now buy more X1 at every price. But is it always true that higher income means an increase in demand? Are there some things you would buy less of if your income was higher? We can distinguish between two kinds of goods. The first is what we call normal goods, which are goods we buy more of when our income rises and less of when it falls. When people earn higher incomes, they buy bigger houses, more clothes, more concert tickets, and more cars. When it comes to market demand, though, we aren't just talking about raising one person's income, but raising the average income for all consumers. If this is demand for a normal good like housing or concert tickets, then a general increase in income for all consumers will shift the market demand curve to the right. When it comes to our graph, it's helpful to remember that increases are represented as shifts to the right, and decreases are represented by shifts to the left. Speaking of decreases, there's another kind of good we call inferior goods, which are goods we buy less of when our income rises and more of when our income falls. These are things like instant ramen, fast food, economy seats on a plane, and used books. As our income rises, we substitute away from these cheaper goods because we can afford more luxurious alternatives like fresh ramen, steakhouses, first-class seats, and brand new copies of a book. If this is the demand for an inferior good, like instant ramen or economy class tickets, then when we increase the average income of consumers, market demand will decrease and shift to the left. People will buy fewer of these goods at every price. As our society has become richer, we've seen this play out. We have way more clothes and go to a lot more concerts than people 100 or 200 years ago. At the same time, we don't buy cheap wigs to cover our poor hygiene or wear clothes made out of burlap, because our higher incomes have allowed us to substitute away from those goods towards good hygiene and better fabrics. So we can see that income is an important determinant of demand. But how demand shifts when income changes depends on what type of good we are dealing with.